I greet you, ladies and gentlemen, as I come before you to make a presentation on the positivist research paradigm. Yesterday, I made a presentation which briefly introduced us to the 4 pillars of a valid research paradigm. The 4 pillars of a valid research paradigm are epistemology, and then next we've got ontology, and then we've got methodology and axiology. Those are the 4 pillars of a research paradigm. Those who were not able to watch my video on the 4 dimensions of a research paradigm, you can check that lecture video. It is there on my channel. It is there on my channel, on this channel, where this particular video actually appears. So today I want to zero in on the characteristics of the positivist research paradigm, because we delved into the particulars of the research paradigm. But today we want to look at the characteristics of the positivist research paradigm. We'll look at the characteristics of the positivist research paradigm from a naive, realist, ontological perspective, and also look at just a summary of the characteristics of research located within the positivist research paradigm. According to scholars, according to the following scholars, Putman and Seal, Putman 2012 and Seal 2015, when we are looking at the positivist research paradigm, one thing which we realize is that there are 5 beliefs that constitute the belief system that underpins the positivist research paradigm. And these 5 beliefs are: number 1, that there exists a world of material objects, that there is a world out there of material objects. Number 2, some statements about these objects can be known to be true through sense experience. In other words, our knowledge of truth about these objects that have got objective material reality, they can be known to be true. In other words, their veracity, it can be ascertained through sense experience, through experience which is mediated by any of the 5 senses or all of the 5 senses, or any combination of the 5 senses. Number 3, these objects exist whether they are actually perceived or even when they are not perceived. These objects of perception are assumed to be largely perception independent. So these objects that exist in the material world, their existence, according to this belief system of the positivist research paradigm, these objects exist whether we perceive them or we don't perceive them. So in a word, such objects of perception are assumed to be largely perception independent. So their existence is not predicated on the ability of the perceiver to perceive the existence of these objects. And then number 4, which is related to what I just said in number 3, is that these objects are also able to retain properties of the types we perceive them as having, even when they are not being perceived. In other words, their properties are also perception independent. So it's not only the objects of our perception which are assumed to be largely perception independent, but even their qualities or their characteristics are also perception independent. The last element of our belief system, or the last strand, or the fifth strand of our belief system, is that by means of our senses, we perceive the world directly and pretty much as it is. In the main, our claims to have knowledge of it are justified. So, after asserting these 5 beliefs, which give birth to the positivist school of thought or research paradigm, we have a heavy reliance on experimental methodology, as I pointed out last night, that experimental methodology facilitates a situation where one variable is manipulated to determine changes in that variable and also maybe changes in other variables as well. So right now I want to just cover very briefly quite a number of characteristics of research that is normally located within the positivist research paradigm, as observed by Neurath, 1973, and Fatel, 2002. Number 1, a belief that theory is universal and law-like generalizations can be made across contexts. So within the positivist research paradigm, there is this belief that a theory can be universally applied, or it should be universally applicable, and that law-like generalizations can be made across different contexts. Number 2, the assumption that context is not important. We know the law of demand and supply. Demand and supply in the furniture market may not be the same as demand and supply in the food market. But within the positivist research paradigm, it is assumed that the law of demand and supply applies regardless of the market context or situation. And then the other aspect is the belief that truth or knowledge is out there to be discovered by the researcher, through the research which they will be undertaking. So in other words, truth is not something which is contingent on the person who is investigating the truth, articulating it and disseminating and sometimes even diffusing it to us in a bid to break it down for us and make us understand truth or knowledge. It is something which is out there, which can be harnessed, which can be grasped. This is one of the most important beliefs of the positivist research paradigm. The other characteristic is the belief that cause and effect are distinguishable and analytically separable. We know in most cases, in dynamic real-world environments, it is very difficult to disentangle cause from effect, because in some instances there might be two-way causation. What is caused may cause the causer, and vice versa. In a situation where there is bi-directional causality, what we call bi-directional causality in mathematics, it becomes very difficult for us to tell the cause and the effect, because the effect may be causing the cause. The cause may be affected by the effect, in which case there is feedback, a feedback mechanism back to the original trigger or cause. But in this positivist research paradigm, there is a belief that cause and effect are distinguishable and analytically separable. And then the next point is the belief that results of inquiry can be quantified. So within the positivist setting or research paradigm, there is a belief that results of inquiry or results of a research can be distilled into mathematical information or numeric information, which can be presented in form of graphs, tables, and the pictorial representations like your pie charts, your histograms, your bar graphs, your compound bar graphs, and so on, or your box plots. And then the next point is the belief that theory can be used to predict and to control outcomes. So there is heavy reliance on theory as opposed to just the pragmatic experiences that are harnessed by the research as they interact with the phenomenon that they're investigating. The next point is the belief that research should follow the scientific method of investigation. And this scientific method of investigation, which I covered yesterday, has got the following main steps. First, you ask a question. Second, you do background research. Third, you construct a research hypothesis. Fourth, you test with an experiment. Seventh, you determine whether the experiment works or not. If it doesn't work, you troubleshoot and retest the variables, the relationship between variables with an experiment again. If the procedure is working, you analyze the data and draw conclusions. If results align with the hypothesis, you communicate the results. If results align partially or not at all with the hypothesis, there is feedback to the stage of hypothesis formulation or construction so that the whole process is repeated again. Sometimes with the partially aligned results, some people, they'll just go straight to communicating the results. Such is the case for students when they are undertaking, say, desktop research and they are facing time constraints. They might not have time to move back in terms of feedback to hypothesis formulation so that they go through the steps again. So that's the scientific method. The next point is that the positivist research paradigm rests on formulation and testing of hypotheses, as I've just noted when I briefly summarized the main sections of the flowchart of the scientific method. And then this hypothetical deductive positivist research paradigm rests on formulation and testing of hypotheses. It also employs empirical or analytical approaches. And there is a pursuit of an objective search for facts. So as opposed to the interpretation of what may be perceived as facts, there is a heavy reliance on the gathering of facts themselves and using those facts to mediate our understanding of phenomena. The researchers in the positivist research paradigm also believe in ability to observe knowledge. In other words, to the positivist researcher or philosopher, there is this belief that knowledge can be observed. The researcher's ultimate aim is to establish a comprehensive universal theory to account for human and social behavior. So these are some of the characteristics of the positivist research paradigm. The last part that I want to cover, before I move on to something else in this first part of our research methodology course, which I introduced yesterday, is the criteria for validating research located in the positivist paradigm. Because any research needs to be validated. But how do we go about validating research within the positivist research paradigm? According to Burns, 2000, the positivist paradigm is usually validated by applying four criteria. And these four criteria are internal validity, external validity, reliability, and objectivity. So there are two types of validity, internal validity and external validity. And then we have got the reliability and objectivity. So when we are looking at internal validity, it is the extent to which the results obtained in a study are attributable to the independent variable that explains their occurrence, and not some other factors which were not specified. Let us assume you are looking at supply and demand for bread. You have got the price of, say, stock margarine. We'll proceed. There was a small mishap. So I was defining internal validity. That internal validity is the extent to which the results obtained in a study are attributable to the independent variable or variables that explains their occurrence and not some other random factors. So internal validity, it means the main variables of a model which have been specified in the model must be strong enough in explaining the total variations or most of the variations in the dependent variable. We must not have a situation where the specified explanatory variable, say the price of bread, explains only 40% of the variation in the quantity of bread which is demanded in the market. We will be in serious trouble if that were to be the case. It would mean our model lacks internal validity, because most of the factors accounting for 60% of the variation in the quantity demanded of bread will be unspecified or random factors which are captured by the error term. So it's imperative that a model is properly specified, so that at the end of the day, we have got a situation where independent variables are able to explain to a larger extent variations in the dependent variable. Now, when we are looking at this aspect of internal validity, there are so many ways in which you can ascertain internal validity. In econometric regression modeling, the R squared is one of the good indicators of the explanatory power of the model. When we are talking about the explanatory power of the model, we are talking about the extent to which the explanatory variables are able to explain changes or account for changes in the explained or determined variable or dependent variable. But when we are looking at external validity, in contrast, it refers to the degree to which the results obtained in a study can be generalized to other contexts. So the results that we obtain from a particular study must be generalizable to other contexts. It's of no use to spend a lot of resources, undertaking a research, only to discover that the results of that research are only applicable to that research alone, or to that situation and no other context. And then next we look at reliability. Reliability is the degree to which a research instrument produces a stable or consistent set of results. The research instrument, be it a questionnaire or maybe an econometric model or a statistical model, it must be able to produce stable or consistent results. Stable and consistent results are reliable to the research, hence the term reliability. And then when we are looking at the fourth aspect, the fourth criteria for checking the validity or for validating the positivist research paradigm, it is objectivity. Objectivity in research is quite a broad criterion. Objectivity. It refers to the degree to which you, as the researcher, utilize precise instruments, approach the research without bias and with honesty, and remain open to suggestions from participants in the study. So in research methods, when we are looking at research methods, objectivity means that all sources of bias are minimized and that personal or subjective ideas are eliminated as humanly possible. In the strictest positivist sense, the criterion implies that as far as possible, the researcher has a duty to remain distanced from the phenomenon that they are studying, so that the findings, which are summarized in the data gathered and the data analyzed, that is information, are not colored by the perceptions of the research or the data gathered. So these are some of the issues that I felt are imperative when we are looking at the positivist research paradigm. The positivist research paradigm is also linked to what is known as the hypothetical deductive approach. The hypothetical deductive approach. So I believe that with the points that I've covered, you are now in a position to understand how exactly to go about your study for it to conform to the positivist research paradigm. So I will just summarize the positivist research paradigm in research so that we are in a position, ladies and gentlemen, to understand the extent to which this research paradigm can be relevant in our studies. So I'll summarize the main points that we actually covered today and also yesterday. Yesterday we covered the 4 pillars of any research paradigm, not just the positivist research paradigm. We covered the dimension of the epistemology of a paradigm. Number 2, we covered the ontology of a research paradigm. Number 3, we covered the methodology of a research paradigm. And then number 4, we covered the axiology or the ethics of a research paradigm. What we covered today are the major characteristics of a research paradigm, of the positivist research paradigm. We covered the main characteristics in today's installment. And we also rehashed the main steps of the scientific method, which are to ask a question or to articulate a question, to do background research, to construct a hypothesis, to test with an experiment, to check whether the procedure is working or not. And then if it is not working, you troubleshoot or debug your program and you go back to testing the experiment. If the procedure is working for testing the experiment, you draw conclusions by analyzing the data and then you discuss your findings in order to be able to distill conclusions, as I've just said. If results align with your previously stated research hypothesis, you just communicate or disseminate the results. But if results do not align completely, you may go to hypothesis formulation or construction and restate your research hypothesis so that you are in a position to use experimental data in order to test the research hypothesis. So those are some of the key points that we need to take into account when we are looking at the positivist research paradigm. It's a very important research paradigm. And I believe that most students in banking, in financial economics, in financial econometrics, in economics, in finance, in many other related fields, they will rely on this research paradigm because it's an important research paradigm. So for the time being, I will end here so that I'm in a position to cover other aspects of our course outline. I believe you have benefited from this installment of notes where we were covering the positivist research paradigm. I know I will do a video in the near future where I will be in a position to cover in an applied sense certain issues related to the positivist research paradigm. But for the time being, what I've covered is enough. Thank you so much. In my next installment of notes, I'm going to revisit the definition of research, because I proceeded with the assumption that we all know what research is, and also the definition of development and reasons for research and the difference between research and development and other attendant issues that are linked to these matters that I'm raising. So that's what I will cover in the next lecture. Remember to like this video, to share it with your friends, and also to write comments so that I know where to improve or where to focus on in order to provide you with a simple and timely information on research methodology. Thank you so much for listening in. Have a good evening.